Welcome back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is the digital age that we are living in, and we are largely dependent on the online services to ease our day-to-day lives. And in keeping with times, the news industry too has been going through a digital transition. But with the advent of OpenAI, the entire game of online news consumption has gone through a sea change. At a click of a finger, one can get curated news content on a variety of issues amalgamated from across the world. But the question that arises is, at what cost is the OpenAI services being rendered to its users across the world? The Digital News Publishers Association has decided to join a prominent news agency's suit against the OpenAI in the Delhi High Court, where they have filed a lawsuit against the OpenAI on the charges of using its copyrighted content. In a statement, the DNPA has said that the suit highlights the concerns expressed by the digital news publishers about the unauthorized mass copying and use of copyrighted works to train AI modules, including OpenAI's GPT models. The DNPA has also expressed concerns over the erosion of news quality due to the lack of transparency in OpenAI's models and the use of copyrighted material to generate advertising revenues at the cost of the news publishers. Simply put, OpenAI is using the data and articles of digital news publishers to train its algorithms without giving the credit for using the property of online news outlets. And these algorithms then use their data and give short, summarized responses directly to the user, which reduces traffic to the publisher's website and affects their revenue. Now, while the matter is in the Delhi High Court, the question that we are raising here is, should there not be accountability when they are consuming content from Indian news portals for their worldwide usage? And to discuss this further, I'm joined by our esteemed panel of guests this evening. Mr. Shree Parthasarathy, who is an independent director of the Forbes Mazars and technology expert, is joining me this evening. Mr. Parthasarathy, thank you so much for taking your time and joining us here at Mirror Now. We are just trying to highlight there being a concern, an ethical concern here. Do you feel that there is a need for a collaboration, or do you feel there is a need for there being some legal framework way by which, if OpenAI is using content, lifting property from the news portals, they ought to ensure there is some sense of accountability and credit should be given?
So, Samia, thank you for having me on the panel. Whether it is essentially content which is digitally available, whether it is content which is essentially creative work, which may be a book, or whether it is a content that may be a painting or whatever it is, I think AI as such, there is something when they are leveraging the content online. What really happens in this content is they are looking at content, they are sort of collating it in terms of publicly available information. But it's also very popularly known that AI, if it just uses only publicly available content, then the richness and the output of AI itself is not that very good. So what they do is they also go into copyrighted and other kinds of content. And in many cases, what happens is if they don't use this particular content verbatim, which is called regurgitation, then essentially it is still okay. And some courts basically look at it from that aspect. But in what the AI basically hides behind is essentially capturing a lot of this particular information and then presenting it. And in this particular case, when you're looking at the news media channels, they're painstakingly capturing a lot of information. They're literally Journalists are creating some content. Then you have them basically doing what you call articles, or you have them doing news feeds which are coming into their particular this thing, and they are also bringing in a lot of syndicated content for which they are paying. And now, if AI all of a sudden comes in and accesses all of this content, and which may be available public because it's on the television and other thing, and then sort of recreates that particular information, republishes, and then is generating other content, then what happens is that it becomes an issue of violation. Somebody may say it is still fair use because I'm not exactly quoting your particular information. But I would take an example of today. If I were to write an article, and if I were to go and bring multiple things from scientific journals, today I still need to give credit to those particular journals. Yeah. And if I'm making money out of that particular article, where I've gotten a lot of things, then there has to be some level of credit that I possibly give to the original author or the publisher, and which is, I think, something we need to very clearly look at. And there are some very famous cases which are still being dealt with in some of the more advanced courts, like in the US and other thing, where still there is no AI law and other thing. For example, there's Thomson's Reuters versus Ross Intelligence. There is also another one with Concord Music with Anthropic, where there are things that are happening in that particular case, but none of those courts have actually ruled. And I think AI is evolving right now. The law is also evolving. So the question about whether the human authorship is what somebody needs to look at, or even any digital content that comes into that particular realm, and if it is being getting compiled and being brought in, how should the judgment be placed on that? That's the way I would look at it.
Absolutely, Mr. Parthasarathy. I'm in complete agreement with you. But when it comes to the OpenAI using the content from the Indian news portals, and it can be from anywhere else in the world as well, and they are using these content with impunity. Of course, they are trying to divert the traffic as well. They are also trying to generate revenue through their ads. But what happens is when you are not even acknowledging or giving the credit to the very source from where you are lifting this information, does it not become an area that requires some sense of a sanction or maybe a filter of sorts that can come through a legal framework? Do you feel there is a time now for a legal framework to be established?
For some of these particular OpenAI or any of these particular algorithms and the engine that are basically running, and they're running with impunity, and where there's significant infringement of this kind of information, I agree with you that there has to be some punitive action, or there have to be certain controls place or guardrails place as to what they can access, what they can publish. And if they are publishing something, the least that they can do is possibly provide credit, right? But if they are generating revenue out of that, then there has to be revenue
Absolutely.
sharing, and which is where a lot of the in some of the other countries, what is really happening is OpenAI and all have gone and signed up with a lot of these particular publishers, and where they are saying, "Hey, give me your copyrighted content so that I can primarily use it." And in the similar vein, they need to possibly do the same thing when it comes to Indian news channels or Indian publishers or Indian original copyrighted work. I do not disagree with you that this is something that needs to be looked at. And I think something that's where in the Indian government has to really rule firmly to protect its citizens and the copyrighted information that they basically have.
But Mr. Parthasarathy, what happens when OpenAI comes out and says that they are only trying to use content that is already available in the public domain? Does that mean that there is no responsibility of the OpenAI if they are taking these information that is publicly available? Because it goes back in the argument that are you trying to do it for the larger good of the people, but you are doing it from a commercial perspective?
I think let's go back to the fundamentals, right? And I take a simple aspect of plagiarism, right? I think all of us are very aware of plagiarism, where people say if you take verbatim some information and put it in, then essentially it's plagiarism. It's not your original work. Similarly, when you write a published article, you need to put in that particular information related to giving credit to various things. And I think that's a rule of thumb that we should possibly apply even in this particular situation. So when I look at it, one of the fundamental things is, even in the digital world, every content that is picked, irrespective of where it is picked, can be tracked and can be labeled. That is one. that what happens is there's a traceability of where I got this information, what did I basically compile, and how did I really put it together, right? And I think that traceability is very clearly available. And if they can basically prove that all of the information that they got is only from publicly available information and can basically do that, then that would be a different uh, aspect that we need to basically consider. But if there is any of that particular content that they basically source in the interim or whatever it is, and then massage that particular content, transformed it, and brought it into the final shape, then I think there has to be a clear ruling and a transparency from their side as to where they got this particular original content from. Because even today, if you look at WhatsApp or you look at any of these particular tools, and if they are generating any kind of information, government and other agencies are looking for traceability of that information, the originality of that content, or if it is fake content and those kind of thing. And which is where I think we need to significantly look at those particular aspects when we consider AI models and what they generate, what is their use, where are they basically sourcing this particular information, labeling of that particular information, and the traceability of it.
Okay. I'm also joined by Mr. Pavan Duggal this evening. Good evening, Mr. Duggal, who is a cybersecurity expert. We were talking about the OpenAI, and I want to begin by asking you, Mr. Duggal, do you see what exactly is happening as far as OpenAI is concerned as an ethical violation where they are lifting content from several sources but are not giving due credit for it? In this particular case, we are talking about news portals, digital news media, who feel that they are violated in the sense that no credit has been given, although their content is being used by AI.
Well, clearly, since the matter is sub judice, we will refrain from commenting on the merits of the same. But practically speaking, it will be up to the plaintiffs to come up with appropriate, cogent electronic evidence to show how their content is being repackaged and repurposed by artificial intelligence for the purposes of giving their output. Now, clearly, the AI service providers are beginning to change their strategy. They're beginning to start giving sources to say this is as a result of this particular information which is available on this source. Primarily, this is being done so that these AI platforms can come within the ambit of fair use. But clearly, if you are using the copyrighted content of another person, even for the purposes of generating revenues for yourself, that is not going to come within the ambit of fair use, and the court should be entitled to go ahead and investigate in the same. Now, what will happen in the peculiar facts of each case will be dependent on the peculiarities of that case, and the courts will have to look at the relevant evidence in that particular regard. But clearly, this is a growing tension issue across the world in various jurisdictions between news portals, between content creators and AI algorithms. More and more, the content creators are seeing that their hard work, their original copyrighted literary artistic works are being copied for the purposes of not just training, but for the purposes of giving effective answers to the queries of the different users. A number of the AI models are using paid service and paid subscription. So that being so, they're effectively generating monies out of content that's been repurposed out of somebody else's copyright. Now, if appropriate electronic evidence or other evidence can be produced before the courts of law, then they can definitely take this forward. But this is a matter of growing concern. At no point of time can the copyright laws of countries be declared as or be brought to be a position of being null and void just because of the predominant use of copyrighted content by AI algorithms. It's time that the world needs to have a fresh look as to how copyright laws need to be interpreted in the context of the AI ecosystem and the AI era.
But Mr. Duggal, if I'm asking you about how the OpenAI is trying to take away the traffic from these news organizations and portals, and in the process manages to generate ad revenue through it. But when it comes to sharing a commercial fraction, do you feel that is the least the OpenAI can possibly do as far as being responsible and fair play is concerned?
Well, I think it's up to the AI algorithms as to how they want to deal with it. It will be a good idea if they can do with industry best practices and come and start sharing some information or some revenues with the content creators primarily so that they can effectively go ahead and avoid the governments and the courts to start coming in this ecosystem. The moment the government starts coming in this ecosystem, or there's close scrutiny of this by the courts, then there's going to be a bigger problem, because then that's going to open up a Pandora's box. But right now, it's early days yet. Right now, it's the same kind of a situation which was there almost about 25 years back, when the Googles and other search engines of the world were coming up, and other content creating websites were saying these guys were taking through search engine queries their legitimate traffic, and they need to be duly compensated. What will have to be seen in the context of AI is, here the algorithm is having a cognitive intelligence of its own. And therefore, using that cognitive intelligence, it's able to intelligently pick and choose the relevant component of the data. So long as it's fair use, and so long as it's within restricted boundaries, it's fine. But the moment you start depriving the creator of the original copyrighted content out of legitimate monies or to internet traffic that would have come to that particular website, that could be seen to be in violation of the existing copyright laws. But of course, each case will have to be seen in its peculiar facts and circumstances.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Parthasarathy, you've heard what Mr. Duggal was saying. And if we are talking about some sense of accountability is concerned, do you feel that there has to be the fair play that needs to be defined better? We do not really know what is the fair play that the OpenAI is saying that they are adhering to, because clearly, as far as these news organizations are concerned, they are not satisfied with it, and that's the reason why they've gone to the court with it.
Right. I think when it comes to fair play, the first and foremost is if I am the author of some content, then what really needs to be done is I need to
Yes.
be consulted ahead of time before anything happens to say, hey, can my content be used or not? Okay. If it's publicly available, fine, that otherwise. But if it is my content, I need to be asked. It's not about using the content, doing the morphing, and then basically putting all the particular references and then calling it fair use, right? And then the aspect saying that hiding behind the aspect that this is not human authorship, that is an algorithm that is basically doing all of this in the background and other thing, and it doesn't come in the mandate, or saying that this particular content doesn't come into the jurisdiction of my particular country, I don't think is in any way fair use or fair law, right? I think that is what it is. And second element is, I think the onus of responsibility is not on the author to go and keep checking whether somebody is using this particular content. Onus of responsibility has to be on the AI generator or OpenAI to basically be able to transparently declare that it is using certain pieces of information to compile that, and that it has permission from those particular copyrighted owners or particular authorship or whatever has happened there, so that they can then move forward from that aspect. Otherwise, everything that they are really looking at moves into the aspect of infringement, and that's the way I look at it.
Absolutely. And as far as the unauthorized usage by the OpenAI of the news content from several different news portals in India is concerned, can then be termed as a theft in broad daylight, because they are doing it with impunity and getting away with it because there is no sense of accountability or onus. I'll wrap this conversation over here, but thank you so much, Shree Parthasarathy and Mr. Duggal, for your very important insights on the subject. And clearly, data is the key, and we are looking at accountability exactly for that. Thank you so much.